Welcome to the Parent Advocate Podcast, a show where we celebrate, defend, support, and uplift the voices of the LGBTQIA community. I'm your host, Stephen Chikumba. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Lisette Trujillo.
Hello, everyone. Lisette here, she, her, aya. The mission of the Parent Advocate Podcast is to elevate conversations and reframe narratives around trans and non-binary youth to help change hearts and minds. Each week, we bring you our take on all things happening from the perspective of two parents of BIPOC transgender kids.
Lisette, this week has been a clusterfuck. There's so much to talk about. I don't even know where to begin.
Oh my gosh, Stephen. There has been so much happening in the universe. There was the unfortunate mass shooting at the Colorado school, and then the killing of the Turning Point leader and the backlash from his death, as well as a lunar eclipse, life found on Mars, and a bunch of other craziness happening in the world.
Lisette, let's not waste time with the little back and forth banter and let's get into the show. Welcome everyone once again to the Parent Advocate Podcast. Let's get started. Okay, Lisette, while I'm really digging our new show format, I still need to get an update from you from time to time. Daniel was on before we got started. So real quick, tell me what's going on.
Stephen, life is lifing. We're being impacted by Trump's tariffs from far away because a bunch of European countries have decided that they will not allow shipping to the US. So luckily can ship using FedEx, but they're charging an arm and a leg. So I'm praying, hoping, wishing, trying to manifest that it will all normalize again in no time. Second of all, this thick lady who spent hours driving in my old life is walking 16,000 steps a day. So my little feet are bruised, battered, and torn up, but things are solid. And Daniel's doing good. He had his first week of school. It's been really interesting to meet parents from all over the world who are now here and hear their stories of how they got here and know that we're not alone. I mean, our stories aren't identical, but there's so many reasons why people need to migrate. And it's just a reminder of how migration is normal and necessary when people are trying to create a life for themselves and keep their family safe. Also, watching the progressive left unravel on social media around what political violence should and shouldn't be has been really frustrating. I wanted to be I want to see that level of energy for migrant people, for Black people, for Indigenous people, not just when someone famous dies. And I won't say his name, but I'll talk about Turning Point when we need to. I think that people who cause harm and cause harm intentionally shouldn't be given our energy and our effort. And so it's been interesting to watch all of that.
So a couple of things. First, I hope you have some good walking shoes because you're fancy and shell tops and Stan Smiths and Gazelles and all the shoes that you be rocking are not appropriate footwear to be hitting them cobblestone streets. So if you getting 16,000 steps, you better get some Hokas, you better get some New Balance, you better get some appropriate footwear for that many steps. Second, good for you for getting in those many steps because that's how we stay healthy and young and upright. So I'm just going to give you your flowers for getting your steps in and give you that little piece of advice for making sure your footwear is right because you can't be dogging your dogs. That don't make no kind of sense.
It's all New Balance right now. You know that.
Okay. Just making sure. Gotta ask the questions. And so even though you didn't ask, I'm finna give you my update because it's been lifing on this side of the ocean as well. I just came back from Boston, where our girl, Rebecca Minor, launched her book, Raising Trans Kids, What to Expect When You Weren't Expecting This. And girl, let me tell you, Rebecca ate. When I say Rebecca ate, I guess where she works, Fenway, hosted the event. So it was in a really posh part of downtown Boston or Cambridge or where the hell we were, in a really nice building. They had a little, I want to say, stage auditorium. It was set up like seating in a theater style seating with drop top down screen projected and good mics. And it was really, really nice. It was catered. They had a little bar and she had like 100 people in this little space show up for her. She sold all her books. She raised $6,000. It was wonderful. I met another dad of a trans kid, Josh Sheldon and Brett. If you're listening, shout out to you both. It was just a beautiful, beautiful night. And I met this woman, Sandra Jaffe. She was a white woman originally from Alabama, living in Cambridge. She and her husband adopted a child, and they adopted a child from an Asian country. They did not adopt a white child. 10 years ago, their child told them that they were a boy. For the past 10 years, Sandra has been capturing this child's story. It was the most interesting conversation because here is this white lady from Alabama and her husband living in Boston who adopted this Asian child who 10 years ago told them that they were a boy and who's been documenting it. And so she was a documentary filmmaker and we were just talking about the dads and her film. And it was just really interesting to hear this story of a family's transition is the best way to put it. And she said she was going to share the documentary, a clip, I guess a trailer for the documentary with me. And so yesterday I got the trailer and it made me cringe. And it made me cringe because it's raw. She shows who she was when her child started and the transition to who she is today. And the who she was, literally, it's cringeworthy. It was like watching the scene from Will and Harper, where he's dressed up like Sherlock Holmes, doing that 16-ounce steak challenge on a stage, and everybody's looking, and you can see the moment which was jovial and exciting and happy and funny quickly became cringy. You could see how Harper was not comfortable and how Will was just oblivious. I got a lot of that energy from that clip, and I recognize it's just a clip. And I also recognize that sometimes it's important for stories like that to be told, as difficult as they are, because people don't necessarily recognize themselves when they're going through these things. People don't recognize the harm that they're doing until they see someone else doing harm and then get that visceral, cringy reaction. And I'm not talking about myself, let's be clear, but I am saying a lot of people go through what I think Sandra and her family went through, where they just can't come to terms with what's happening. And so they say and do all of the wrong things in an effort to determine whether or not what their child is going through is real. And so it was one thing to meet her and to see this really progressive, liberal, on point mother doing the best, showing up at this function, talking about the importance of having books like this. And then to see that clip that she said about who she clearly was not 10 years ago and be vulnerable enough to share this story with the rest of the world. Right? It's still in production. It hasn't come out. It's not ready yet. I was actually talking to her about potentially helping her produce her film, but it was like, wow, these stories need to be told and people need to recognize that there's a journey that people go through to get to the other side. And it's not always pretty. And I know that that's not a comfortable thing to say. And I know you have feelings, but that's just kind of what my weekend was. And then getting back to Colorado and Turning Point and the backlash from Turning Point, it's been quite the week.
Stephen, I love hearing about Rebecca's event, and I'm really sad I wasn't there. I wish I could have been. I think you're right. I have enough space. I was having this conversation in a meeting that I was facilitating earlier in the week for GLM. I was telling this tiny group of parents that prior to me leaving, if you put me at the 2 years prior to this, maybe a year and a half, I was feeling the impact, the political impacts in a very visceral way, where I didn't have the capacity to hold someone in their new journey. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because I was like, whoa, we don't have time for you. Like, we are headed towards fascism. Our children are being harmed. You should have caught up. And I felt very angry. It's mostly white families. I mean, let's face it. This is their entry point into oppression. They don't know what to do with it. They're like stressed out and they want us to make it make sense for them. And at the time, I just didn't have it in me. And I have some space. And the one thing that I did tell the parents is oftentimes these new families will say, I know nothing. I don't know anything. But they do know words like grief and stealthness and passability. Like, they know these big concepts. and they know them for what they mean to them, but they don't know them and what they actually mean in the harm that it causes community and movement. And I'm like, how do we arm them with different words? How do we give them something different and new that pulls us forward in a way that doesn't harm trans people, that doesn't harm movement work? How do we get parents there? And so I don't have the answer, but I've just been thinking about it because I'm like, where did they get the big words to come into the space as newbies, right? And so I agree, like, I want to see this documentary. And I also want someone to be like, where did you hear the words that you used in the beginning of your journey? Where did you go? Who did you turn to? What do you wish would have been in place for you to get you where you are now? What helped you get here now? I think all of it is really important. All that to say, because you were like, I know you have feelings, and I do, but I'm like, how do we help? Right? I feel like I'm a little bit past angry, and I'm ready to be of use again. You know what I mean?
I do. I know exactly what you mean because, like I said, when I had this conversation with this woman, I had a conversation with a very enlightened person. And when I saw the trailer, I was looking back at the person she was before she got here, and I had to remember, I had to remind myself, I am watching the evolution of a person, and I cannot sit in the place of discomfort, that visceral cringeworthy experience that I had when I first started watching because it's raw. It's super raw. This is not a film crew. This is home video style, iPhone shot style, camcorder style shooting of these really intimate moments between this mother and her child and her husband, where her kid's like, will you stop? Like, that's one of the scenes. Like, will you stop? And they slam the door as this mother is like asking them questions. Why did you change your name on your door, et cetera, et cetera? Where it's just like, these are real things that we know as people who've helped parents through their journeys are things that people say and they do. And again, for people who think that parents like us are just, yay, my kid has decided that they're a girl and not a boy. This is so wonderful. We're celebrating everything. No, that is not what happens. We are often fraught with guilt. We are often challenging our children. We're often pushing back because we recognize that their life isn't going to be easy. We don't recognize that what we're doing is being transphobic. We think we're trying to protect our children, and we have those words because society reinforces those words. Society gives us that language. I was watching a video on Instagram the other day, and the caption is like, we learned racism early. And it's a game show, and there's three kids on the stage. And the question is like, what does the term yellow mean? And this white kid says, I think that means someone who's Chinese. And then the next student on the stage, who happens to be of Asian descent, says, a person who is cowardly. That is correct. These kids are maybe 10, 11 on this game show. And so it's like, yeah, where do we learn it? Society teaches us it. We don't necessarily need an explicit parent who's a member of the KKK to teach us racism because society teaches us racism implicitly and explicitly. And we learn it at super young ages before we even understand the concept of vocabulary. We understand these concepts very intimately.
So perfectly said. And honestly, like every time I see those videos of them talking about these subjects with kids, my mind is like, we fail our children in so many ways. It's jarring. Like, it's jarring to see that and to hear that. Well, I think that this podcast will hopefully help shift the way people talk about supporting trans youth and their kids. And it's a daily conversation around like what we do. I'm grateful that Rebecca wrote that book and having those conversations with families. I think we need more people willing to engage and to support and be a resource. And I'm hoping that it won't be as extractive as it has been, because a lot of times families come in, they get what they need and they leave, and they don't build on the support that they've gotten, right? And so extraction needs to not be part of the parent community space culture either. It's time for us to give back and do more.
I agree. I agree. And it's interesting because this is a really good segue to the conversation that happened immediately before the Turning Point shooting happened. There are people who are willing to stand up and challenge some of these long held racist, stereotypical beliefs about members of marginalized communities. I think specifically to Hunter Kozak, the individual who posed that question immediately before the Turning Point shooting occurred, who specifically asked, do you know how many transgender Americans have been shooters over the last 10 years? And that's a deep and heavy question to which there's an actual answer. Of course, the person who received that question lied. Too
Yep.
many was their response. And it's interesting how things happen
Mm-hmm.
because so many people went on the rampage blaming trans people and immigrant people and all kinds of people for what happened when in fact the truth of the matter is one of theirs did this. One of theirs did this. It wasn't some radicalized trans person. It was a radicalized white person with a gun taking matters into their own hands. And it's just, I mean, I know I started off talking about how there are people who are willing to stand up and say things that push back against these narratives, which is exactly what that question was. But it really does lead to this bigger issue of like, where are we in society when even the people who are the bad actors are turning against one another?
Yeah, that's heavy. Watching the news today, they don't know who to blame. They don't know how to accept blame for an angry, hateful, violent ecosystem that they funded,
That they created.
right, and created. And so it's an irony. And at the same time, I think as you and I know very well, the violence in America is culture. It is American culture. It's what I get asked the most about here, right? Like living abroad, people are like, is that real? Is that like, really? Do people just walk around with guns? And I'm like, yeah, no, that's real. This is a real fear. And it's the one thing that Daniel, especially because we're talking about, we also had mentioned earlier, the Evergreen High School shooting, right? Around the fact that like, I think there's been so far like over 200 school shootings just this last year, if not more. Don't quote me on it. But I remember just the other day, Daniel coming to me and being like, I'm so glad I don't have to worry about that anymore. And so you see these acts of violence and they're not isolated anymore, right? We can't say that they are isolated. I think I might have shared this story with you in an earlier episode. So if I have, and listeners are like, was that you've already talked about this? One of my sorority sisters survived a classroom shooting in the nursing college at the U of A. I was on campus that day. They shut everything down. I remember seeing helicopters. It's also the early aughts. We didn't have phones in the way that we do now. So people, it was like, if you bumped into somebody on campus, they were like, don't go near that part of the school. And then a few days later, I found out that it was one of my sorority sisters, and the shooter had let her leave the classroom. He allowed her and another student to leave the classroom. And so they survived. And I think about her all the time. I mean, to live through something like that, it must be awful. And I think about the irony that this person, this media personality, talked about empathy being a made-up word, and how we see the far right and the religious right say that empathy is a sin. And then when violence comes out of their community, they are shocked when we don't show empathy. And it's not that I don't feel empathy. I think we all feel stunned and unsettled and worried about what this means for the future of our country, because we are so divided. And it's also like, we can't carry the burden of what they're creating either. That is not our fault, right? We're coming from places of love and inclusion. But we see the world in polar opposite ways. I just got, and you saw this on my Substack, but I woke up to like a religious bullshit message from a sorority sister that was like, she literally said, he did not teach the things that your friend says he did. Because it was in response to one of our friends and parent advocate, Debbie Jackson. She wrote a post about this, and I had shared her post. And she's like, the things that your friend said he did not do. But you and I know that that's contrary to truth. Turning Point targeted Daniel's school specifically for months. We were at school board meetings. They were spewing anti-trans rhetoric in every single one of those meetings. Turning Point put my good friend Russ on their professor watch list. They targeted our friend Debbie directly. You and I know that this is
is the truth. And then when we saw threats on HBCU campuses follow their leader's death, that is truly the legacy, the racist legacy, the racist violent legacy.
Absolutely. That is the legacy of this country. When people talk about make America great again, they're saying make America racist again. Make America a place where only white people have privilege and everyone else is subjugated to the whims and caprices of white people. That is the greatness to which they aspire. And the reality is they have been the reason that children are committing shootings at schools. They are the reason that young men are committing acts of mass casualty in this country. They are the reason that immigrants, women, people of color, disabled people, anyone other than white cishet males feel fear in society, because at any given point in time, you could be the victim of untold violence. You know, they're talking about this 16-year-old who committed this shooting at the Evergreen High School in Colorado was radicalized. He's 16. He's 16. What are you doing at 16? Why are you following someone like the leader of Turning Point? Why are you doing that? You should be playing games. You should be hanging out with your friends. You should be studying geometry or calculus. You should be being a kid. You shouldn't be taking a revolver and ammunition and shooting up your high school. This 22-year-old kid who is allegedly the shooter at Turning Point, you should be graduating from college. You should be getting a job. You shouldn't be engaged in a war between Nick Fuentes' organization and Turning Point. Like, what are we doing? Which of us is the more radical, more racist, more pure in their hatred of anything other than white people? Like, these are your aspirations. But again, this is what this country is doing to people in this country, to white people in particular, because, you know, we black and brown people have always known this country to be a violent place. That's its history. That's the history of imperialism. That's the history of colonialism. You go to a place, you rape and pillage and subjugate, period. That's it. And if you don't acknowledge that history, you are doomed to repeat it. It's going to play itself out in perpetuity.
The points that you are making are so important. Daniel was talking to me about an article he and I both saw circulating online about how Gen Z women are actually not dating Gen Z men. They're looking to date older men, like millennials, because the ideas that they carry are so radical and so anti-women that they just can't connect with them. They feel unsafe. And so you're talking about a generation of men who've been made to feel disaffected. And the reality is that humans need connection. Humans need love. They need to feel connected to the person next to them. And I don't think that the answer is to get rid of social media and all the technology we have. I think the point that we're in is that we're not teaching our children how to use social media as a tool, right? Like, they think it's real connection and it isn't. It's about staying connected and building connection. And so it makes me feel like we are in a turning point, no pun intended, in terms of how we move forward as a society. And I don't think any of us have that answer. It's too big.
It really is. And it's interesting because when Facebook first came out, the only way you could get on is if you were invited. And it was a real social network because you only typically connected with people you actually knew. It wasn't just a free-for-all where people were just trying to aggrandize connections so that they looked like they were popular. Because again, now I think the goal in social media is, what do they call it? Clout chasing. You're trying to have as many people follow you and like your stuff and share and repost and retweet. And the algorithm really rewards that type of mass follow, mass like, mass comment behavior. And so you're going for the clickbaity stuff versus the things to allow you to have real connection. When we were introduced to social media, it was an effort to reconnect with people that time and distance may have separated you from, and for you to reform those bonds. Now it's just like you're trying to aggrandize as many people as possible because there is potential pecuniary benefit from it. You can make money, you can get endorsement deals, you can do all this other stuff. And so that personal connection is gone, is lacking. And so, yeah, kids who are introduced to technology today are not seeing the importance of personal and interpersonal connections. They're seeing clout. They're seeing, hey, I can make money. I can be popular. I can be an influencer and get all these influencer benefits, but there's no deeper connections in that. And I think that the transactional nature of social media today is what has created these pockets of isolation that children are feeling and that they're responding to, which is where a turning point or a Moms for Liberty or a you insert radical, not wholesome organization name here, and people gravitate to that because there's some kind of connection that they're getting. There's some sort of, inclusion that they feel by associating with some of these things that are, for reasonable people, radical and really off in the fringes and really polarizing. But hey, I have a tribe of people who all think like me, who all feel like me, who all are experiencing the same type of isolation and marginalization that the grievance politics of white males seems to really reinforce right now. Go figure.
It's interesting too, because I'm thinking about how this is really not new and probably decades in the making. I think a lot about, I was a Pearl Jam fan. I still am, but I didn't really follow them that far off later on. But I don't know if you remember the song from the 90s, Jeremy Spoken.
Of course.
We're still there. You know what I mean? And so it has to be something going on in white culture. It's a reckoning that they really have to figure out too, right? Like, how do you help the men in your communities feel human? I don't know what that is. I can't speak to it. I don't understand it. I actually had someone send me that it was like a battle between Nick Fuentes and the Turning Point folks. And I was like, wait, there's a battle between, I was like, I don't even know this world. I hear about it. I can think about it in theory and what it must mean for men to be isolated in this way. And I just can't wrap my mind around it.
Well, Lisette, that is a whole separate episode that we are going to have to get into at another time, because I think we should probably wrap this episode with our allies and assholes. Now it's time for our traditional segment, Allies and Assholes, where we highlight individuals or groups who are celebrating the LGBTQIA community on the one hand and drag all those who are trying to move them all back as assholes on the other. So who should our ally of the week be?
Stephen, our allies of the week are the military families who are suing the Trump administration over the gender affirming care ban. So 3 military families are suing the Department of Defense over a policy that prevents military clinics or insurance from covering gender affirming care under TRICARE. The case Doe versus the Department of Defense was filed in a U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland by GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders, or who we know as GLAD Law, and NCLR. These families are suing because their children are being prohibited from accessing gender affirming care. This is a really important case. And it's really, really important, especially post-Grameti, around whether insurances will still be able to cover gender affirming care in areas where gender affirming care hasn't been banned. So thank you to these 3 families who are putting themselves on the line, because being part of a lawsuit is a long, drawn out, stressed out process.
This is really important because I don't think people recognize that this is the first domino in a series that will fall if the administration is allowed to go forward with these bans. When he who shall not be named first took office, one of the first executive orders was to eliminate the ability for service members to have their families insured if they had transgender children. So that was the first thing. And then they banned transgender military members and service members. And then they banned the ability for these service members to get care. So all of these things that they've been doing by executive fiat have been challenged in court and, for the most part, have been found to be unconstitutional, or that they didn't follow the appropriate administrative process in order to eliminate care. And so while these cases have been filed in court, this is the first time that all of them have been challenged by a plaintiff class that has the appropriate standing to bring the case at this level. And so, as you said, lawsuits take a long time. As a former practicing attorney, I know exactly what that means, but it is really encouraging to see that people are not sitting idly by and they're challenging these policies straight up.
And Stephen, this is why these 3 military families are our allies of the week.
Now on to our asshole of the week. And before the show, Lisa and I were going back and forth about who it should be. I said it should be Utah Governor Spencer Cox for praying and hoping through heartfelt tears that the Turning Point shooter was not one of our own. And by not one of our own, this fool meant not a white man from Utah, not a Republican from Utah. He wanted it to be someone from out of state, someone black or an immigrant or someone from out of this country. And he was all boohoo over the fact that it was a white Republican man from Utah. Sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry is right. And I wanted our asshole of the week to be the Wall Street Journal for publishing that it was probably a transgender person who committed this crime.
I'm sorry, Lisa, that's not all they did. That's not all they did. Because in addition to suggesting that the shooter was trans, they also said that they found markings that suggested transgender ideology on the shell casings at the site where the shooter apparently shot from. Made up bullshit, like the absolute lack of journalistic integrity by the Wall Street Journal and other mainstream media outlets is astounding. Astounding.
And then they try to quietly walk it back by just changing the title of their article.
I'm sorry, that's not how this works. When you do something that is wrong journalistically, you issue a retraction. You say, I did the wrong thing. And so I am acknowledging it because that's how you maintain journalistic integrity. But in this day and age of genuflecting to he who shall not be named, they don't even do that anymore. They don't even observe simple practices that made people capable of trusting what was in print media.
That's right, Stephen. It was unconscionable. And the fact that they will not apologize, even worse.
And this is why Governor Spencer Cox and the Wall Street Journal are our asshole of the week. Well, that's our show for today, folks. I gotta give it up to my co-host Lisette Trujillo for keeping this show banging as she always does.
And thank you, Stephen, for always keeping people honest and keeping people supported in all of our spaces that we get to share. And I can't tell you, this conversation was what I needed, and I hope that our listeners will feel the same way too. Please know to all of our listeners that we couldn't do this without you either. So thanks for tuning in to the Parent Advocate Podcast.
And folks, please be sure to follow Lisette and I on our Substacks, subscribe to our YouTube channels, and do everything you've got to do to stay up to date with everything going on here at the Parent Advocate Podcast.
Bye.
Goodbye.